The mind of a man is not designed to bear the weight of being a god. When a mortal rises so high that he forgets the ground, the gravity of reality always calls him back, and it does so unkindly. It is a law as inevitable as death. The higher the ascent, the more brutal the correction. There was a man who tested this law. His name was Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. He was not simply a king. He was the benchmark of power in the ancient world. The pharaohs of Egypt were relics of a faded past. The kings of other lands were mere vassals, names in a tribute record. Nebuchadnezzar was power in the present. He was the sun of his era, and the rest of the world lived under his light or burned by his heat. He did not inherit an empire. He forged it with fire and strategy. His armies were a relentless machine that had redrawn the map of the known world. He had crushed the power of Egypt, dismantled the kingdom of Judah, razed its capital, Jerusalem, and set fire to the legendary Temple of Solomon. He took the elite of the Hebrew nation as captives, turning prophets and princes into servants of his court. His military power was only matched by his will to build. He was the architect of civilization, the master of brick and asphalt, and his masterpiece, his monument to himself, was the city of Babylon. It was not a city, it was a declaration. It was the capital of the world, a fortress designed to impress and intimidate, to tell every visitor, every merchant, and every ambassador that they had arrived at the center of the universe. Let's imagine walking through that city. To enter, we would have to cross a series of walls so colossal that they dwarfed anything humanity had built before. The outer wall alone had kilometers of circumference. But the true marvel was the processional way. It was a paved avenue with limestone and tar, flanked by towering walls. And on those walls, in reliefs of glazed brick in vibrant colors, 120 lions marched with open jaws, symbols of the goddess Ishtar and the king's power. Walking through that corridor was an experience of calculated terror and awe, and that avenue led us to the main entrance, the Ishtar Gate. Today, its reconstructed remains in a Berlin museum barely hint at its glory. In its time, it was a marvel. It was covered with a deep and intense lapis lazuli blue that looked like a piece of the night sky brought to earth. On that blue background, the symbols of the gods marched in perfect rows. Golden bulls representing Adad, the storm god, and the formidable Mushusu, the dragon serpents of Marduk, the city's patron god. It was a fortress, yes, but more than that, it was a work of theology. It was a declaration that the gods themselves guarded the city of Nebuchadnezzar. Inside, the city was a marvel of engineering. Dominating the horizon was the great ziggurat, the Etemenanki, the temple of the foundation of heaven and earth. A stepped tower rising hundreds of meters, an attempt to connect the human world with the divine, and probably the structure that inspired the legend of the Tower of Babel. But the true jewel of the king, his personal project, was the Hanging Gardens. Such a legendary marvel that Greek historians would name it one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Legend has it that he built them for his wife, a Median princess who missed the green mountains of her homeland. In the brown, dusty plain of Mesopotamia, Nebuchadnezzar built an artificial mountain, a series of vaulted terraces, waterproofed with lead and asphalt, upon which exotic trees, vines, and flowers were planted. An astonishing engineering feat was needed just to lift the water of the Euphrates River to the top of that structure. It was an act of pure will. It was Nebuchadnezzar telling nature itself that he could reshape it at will. This was the man, the conqueror, the architect, the master of the world. And every brick fired in the ovens of Babylon, each one of them was stamped with an inscription. I am Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, provider of the temples, the one who built this. His name, his I, was literally in the foundations of civilization. He not only ruled the world, he felt he had created it. He had become, in his own mind, a partner of the gods. Or perhaps, in the dark recesses of his pride, He felt that the gods were simply an extension of his own majesty. Absolute power not only corrupts, it isolates. And in that isolation, the mind begins to believe its own lies. Nebuchadnezzar had risen so high that there was no one left to say no to him. A man who has no one above him on earth can only be warned from the sky. And the warning arrived, not with an army on the horizon, but from the only place the king could not control, his own subconscious. It came to him at night through a dream so vivid, so powerful, that it woke him terrified. He did what any absolute king would do. He summoned his wise men, his magicians, his astrologers. But they, fearing for their lives, could not interpret the vision. Only one man dared. A Hebrew captive named Daniel, a man who served the king but worshipped a different god, the god of the people whom Nebuchadnezzar had enslaved. The king told him the dream. He saw a tree, an enormous tree in the middle of the earth. Its top reached the sky, and it was so wide that it could be seen from the ends of the world. Its leaves were beautiful, and its fruit abundant, providing food for all creatures. The beasts of the field found shade under it, and the birds of the sky nested in its branches. It was the tree of life, the center of the world, the perfect symbol of its own kingdom. Powerful, providing, and protecting. But then, the vision changed. Horror began. A vigilante, a holy being, descended from the sky, and he shouted with a terrible voice, "Cut down the tree, cut its branches, tear out its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts flee from beneath it." But the order was not for total annihilation. There was a strange clause. "But leave the stump of its roots in the ground, bound with an iron and bronze band, among the grass of the field." And then the decree became personal. "Let it be soaked with the dew of heaven, and let its portion be with the beasts. Let its heart of man be changed, and be given a heart of beast, and let 7 times pass over it." Daniel, upon hearing this, was horrified, not because of the dream, but because of its meaning. He paled, and the king had to urge him to speak. And Daniel, with astonishing bravery, told the truth to the most powerful man in the world. "My lord," he said, "the tree you saw, which grew and became strong, and whose top reached the sky, is you, O king." He explained that the decree of heaven was a sentence against him. He would be cast out of human society. He would lose his mind. He would live like a wild animal in the field. He would eat grass like oxen. And this madness would last 7 times, probably 7 years. The cause of this trial was explicit: his pride. And the purpose was the cure. Until you recognize that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. But even then, there was hope in the sentence. The stump of the roots remaining in the ground signified that his kingdom would be restored to him, but only after he learned the lesson. And then Daniel, risking his life, gave the king advice, a last chance. "Therefore, O king, accept my advice. Redeem your sins with justice, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. Perhaps thus your tranquility will be prolonged." Such a specific, such a terrifying warning from a prophet I respected should have broken anyone's spirit. It should have led to humility, to reflection, and perhaps it did, for a while. But pride is a drug, and Nebuchadnezzar's drug was everywhere. It was in every brick bearing his name, in every bow of his courtiers, in every report from his generals. The routine of power is a sedative for the conscience. Fear faded away. The warning was forgotten. Life returned to normal. A whole year passed, 12 months, more than enough time to change, to show mercy, to remember the warning. The prophecy had become an uncomfortable memory. One day, the king was walking on the terrace of his royal palace in Babylon. It was the pinnacle of the world, contemplating the largest city in the world. The sun reflected on the blue tiles of the Ishtar Gate. He could see the smoke from sacrifices rising from the great ziggurat. He could see the hanging gardens, an impossible wonder that his own will had created. He felt that wave of power, achievement, divinity, and he took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the air of his city. And then he uttered the fatal words, the words that sealed his fate. He did not say them to anyone in particular. He said them to the universe, to himself. The king spoke and said, "Is not this the great Babylon that I built for the royal house with the strength of my power and for the glory of my majesty? The I, the my power, the my majesty." It was the pure crystallization of his pride. He had failed the test, and the sentence, held back for 12 months, fell. The response from heaven was instantaneous. The text is chilling in its precision. The word was still on the king's lips when a voice from heaven came. "To you it is spoken, King Nebuchadnezzar. The kingdom has been taken away from you." It was not a slow process. It was not a gradual decline into senility. It was a switch. It was a blow. At that very moment, the light went out in the king's eyes. The mind that had designed the Ishtar Gate, the mind that had conquered nations and governed an empire, was shattered. What happened next is the record of the deepest humiliation imaginable. The man who believed himself to be a god was no longer even a man. His courtiers, his guards, saw him. The terror they must have felt. The king collapsed, not like a sick man, but like a terrified animal. His eyes no longer recognized anyone. The royal robes were a nuisance. He rejected cooked food. He tried to bite his servants. Modern scholars have given a name to this rare delirium: boanthropy, a real psychological condition, though extremely rare, in which the patient firmly believes he is an ox or a cow. He crawls on all fours. He tries to moo, and instinctively seeks to eat grass. For the Babylonian court, this was a disaster of unimaginable proportions. The king was crazy. Not just eccentric, but clinically, animalistically crazy. They took him out of the palace. They couldn't allow the world to see this. The king of the world could not be seen crawling and mooing. They took him beyond the palace walls, to the royal gardens, or perhaps to the open field, where they left him, as the prophecy had said, with the beasts of the field. The 7 years began. 7 years. 2,555 days. It is difficult for us to comprehend the magnitude of this horror. The first year must have been a hell of senses. His smooth skin, accustomed to silks and fine oils, burned under the relentless Mesopotamian sun. The cold nights made him shiver. The morning dew, which the prophecy mentioned, was not a poetic metaphor. It was a cold, damp reality that soaked him to the bones. He ate grass. His human digestive system, not designed for raw cellulose, must have rebelled. He must have lived in a constant state of sickness and pain. For the second and third year, the body adapted. The skin tanned and turned into leather. His hands and knees, now his main means of transportation, became filled with thick, cracked calluses, and his mind sank further. Language, that pillar of the human eye, rotted and fell away. Complex thoughts, strategies, memories of his own glory, all disappeared, replaced by the primal instincts of the animal: fear, hunger, survival. By the 4th and 5th year, the transformation was complete. The man called Nebuchadnezzar no longer existed. Only the creature remained. Its hair, which had not been cut in years, grew wild, tangled, full of mud, leaves, and lice. The text says it grew like eagle feathers, a vivid description of long, thick, dirty tufts. Its nails, which had not been trimmed, continued to grow. They curled, thickened, turned yellow and brittle. Useless claws for a man, but perfect for an animal that digs the earth in search of roots. Like those of birds, let's imagine this creature, the ancient master of the world, now less than the lowest of his slaves. He hid from the jackals at night. He drank from puddles of dirty water. He fled from the sound of humans. Time was no longer a line of achievements. It was a circle of sunrises and sunsets. The sun rose, ate. The sun set, hid, and trembled. Existence was reduced to its most basic and fearful core. The man who had risen to the sky was now firmly tied to the earth, eating from it like the most humble of oxen. It was the perfect, symmetrical, and terrible correction for his pride. 7 years passed in this mindless fog. What did the most powerful court in the world do while their king ate grass? This is the fascinating silence of history. The official Babylonian records, the Chronicles of the Kings, do not mention this. Of course not. Propaganda is as old as power. No empire would carve into stone the madness of its greatest king. History is written by the victors, and the victors edit their moments of shame. Most likely, a regency was established. His son, evil Merodach, or a council of generals and priests, ruled in his name. The throne remained officially occupied. The people were told that the king was ill, or meditating, or on a distant military campaign. The machinery of the empire continued, but at its center was an empty throne and a terrifying secret. The silence of the Babylonian records is not proof against history. It is proof of the shame it caused. And then one day, after the 7 years had passed, after the sentence was fully paid, something happened. The creature, the beast man, was in the field. Perhaps it was morning. And for the first time in 2,555 days, something in his broken brain reconnected. The stump of the roots, kept alive underground, began to sprout. The text describes it with sublime simplicity. But at the end of time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven. He had been looking down for 7 years, at the earth, at the grass, at the next meal. 7 years of a purely animal perspective. And now, in an act that is fundamentally human, and perhaps divine, he raised his gaze. He looked beyond himself. He looked to the sky. And at that moment, his reason was restored. Let's imagine the horror of that moment of lucidity. The return of consciousness should not have been a relief, but an agony. Suddenly, he remembered. He remembered who he was. He remembered the palace, the robes, the power. And he saw himself. He saw his hands, now dirty claws. He felt the weight of his tangled hair. He smelled the stench of his own body, a 7-year-old animal odor. The impact of that self-awareness would have driven a lesser man insane. But Nebuchadnezzar was no longer the man he once was. Pride had been completely burned away. And the first thing he did with his restored mind, the first thing he did with the gift of returned language, was not curse his fate. He did not shout for his gods. He did not cry over his own misery. His first act was to bless the Most High. There, in the field, still appearing as a beast, the king praised and glorified the one who lives forever. He accepted the lesson. He publicly acknowledged that the power he had built in Babylon was not his own. He recognized that the Most High is the one who rules, and that his own kingdom was only alone. And at the moment humility replaced pride, the restoration was complete. His counselors and nobles, who perhaps had been watching him from a distance, waiting for this very moment, came to him. The text says that they sought him. They took him back to the palace. They bathed him. They cut his hair and nails. They dressed him again in royal robes, and they seated him once more on the throne. He was restored to his kingdom. But he was not the same king. The man who returned to the throne was wiser, more humble, and according to his own testimony, greater greatness was added to him. The experience had not destroyed him. It had completed him. That is why we know this story. The king, a master of propaganda, understood the power of his own story. An ordinary king would have erased this chapter. He would have executed anyone who saw him in his animal state. He would have carved new victories in stone to cover the void of 7 years. But Nebuchadnezzar did the opposite. He took his deepest humiliation, the most shameful secret of his empire, and turned it into an official decree. He wrote a letter, a public confession, and sent it to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth. The story we know is not the gossip of an enemy. It is the personal testimony of the king himself. It is the strangest and bravest document issued by an absolute monarch in the history of humanity. In him, he recounted every detail: the dream, the warning, his pride, the fatal words on the rooftop, and yes, the 7 years of madness. He admitted to the whole world that the king of Babylon, the conqueror of the world, had eaten grass like an ox, and he did it with a purpose: to teach the lesson he had learned in the hardest way. He ended his decree with these words: "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, extol, and glorify the King of heaven, because all his works are true and his ways are just, and he can humble those who walk in pride." The man who believed himself a god became a witness, and his story survives not as a record of his power, which turned to dust along with the bricks of his city, but as an eternal warning. A warning that the human mind is a fragile place and was never designed to bear the weight of being a god.